The crown has seen wars, scandals, and abdications, but never this. In his final days, King Charles III, frail and overwhelmed with emotion, pens a handwritten will that shatters royal silence. His dying wish? To see Prince William and Prince Harry reunited, not just as brothers, but as leaders of the monarchy. Behind palace walls, letters were sent, tears were shed, and history quietly changed. What does a king say when he knows the end is near? The king weeps behind closed doors. On the misty morning of October 10th, 2025, the gates of Sandringham Estate closed quietly behind a string of unmarked vehicles. Inside, King Charles III had summoned his closest aides and clerics. His health, which had been in steady decline since August, had sharply worsened after a series of fainting episodes. According to sources within the royal household, Charles insisted on privacy for what he called the most important duty of my reign. But behind those closed doors, it wasn't statecraft that unfolded. It was heartbreak. Inside his private study at 10:30 a.m., Charles dictated 2 letters, one addressed to Prince William, the other to Prince Harry. His voice cracked repeatedly as he spoke the words aloud, insisting on writing them by hand. A senior aide present during the moment claimed he wept while writing. Full tears. Not as a king, but as a father, Charles repeated a single line multiple times. They must find each other again. The crown needs them both. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. The last time Charles had addressed both sons in the same document was in 2022, during the Queen's funeral procession arrangements. Since then, silence had filled the void between them. The rift, ignited by Harry's departure to California in 2020, had grown into a chasm filled with memoirs, interviews, and wounded pride. But now, facing the limits of time, Charles looked past protocol. He referred to the upcoming letters as his final act as both father and sovereign. Those words, spoken at 11:12 a.m., were later recorded in the king's personal log. By 3 p.m., Charles asked for a moment alone. Aides report he remained in the study until after sundown, seated by the window, rereading both letters multiple times. The light in the room remained on well past midnight, a flickering beacon in the Norfolk darkness. For a man who had ruled with quiet dignity, this was the moment where the monarch gave way to the father. And it was only the beginning of the royal reckoning that would follow. What Charles put to paper that day wasn't just a private confession, it was the spark of a royal reckoning. He knew time was short, and the divisions between his sons had outlived their usefulness. As his health faltered, Charles chose not to focus on legacy, but on healing. And so, behind palace gates and far from cameras, he wrote something few monarchs ever had: a will not of wealth, but of hope. And what came next shook the institution to its core. A private will, a public secret. By October 14th, 2025, the king's handwritten letters were no longer just private farewells. At Buckingham Palace, in a hushed meeting inside the Queen's former drawing room, Charles summoned the Lord Chamberlain, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and his personal legal advisor. He issued an unprecedented instruction, a final will and testament that bypassed traditional royal procedures. This is not about estate, he clarified. This is about family. His exact wording was logged in the royal archives at 1:47 p.m. The will, signed by Charles and witnessed by 3 members of the Privy Council, included a shocking request. that William and Harry serve as joint figureheads of the monarchy in his absence or after his passing. While constitutionally symbolic, the gesture carried immense emotional and cultural weight. It was a direct rejection of the silent war that had fractured the brothers since Harry's exit in 2020. Charles hoped the will would serve as a catalyst, not for headlines, but for healing. Security surrounding the document was immediate and intense. A copy was stored beneath Buckingham Palace in the Windsor Vault, while another was sealed in the Archbishop's private archive. A third was held in Sandringham, placed inside Charles's personal writing box. The will was never announced publicly. Only 9 people knew of its existence in the first 72 hours. The palace feared leaks. More so, they feared criticism. The king's request was bold, and in the eyes of some, controversial. But he had made his peace with the risk. More than anything, Charles feared leaving behind a legacy of silence. "I was too slow to act," he allegedly confessed during the will signing. "But I will not leave this earth without trying." Those closest to him said the act brought a strange calm to the king. The document, dated October 14th, bore no royal flourish, just his signature in slightly shaky ink. But it would change the direction of a family that had been divided for far too long. A monarch had written his final wish, not in law, but in love. The will existed now, sealed, secured, and sacred. But Charles knew that ink alone couldn't heal wounds. To make this final request real, he had to take the next step: personal delivery. He would not use email, nor phone, nor digital messenger. This moment required tradition. It required solemnity. And above all, it required courage. The king selected a trusted envoy, a man who had served the crown for over 4 decades, and gave him one quiet mission: find Prince Harry and place the letter in his hands. The ghost of Diana shapes the request. Before the letter ever left the country, Charles made one final addition: a photograph. On October 15, 2025, in the king's private study, he placed a picture of Princess Diana, taken in 1991, between the 2 letters. The same photo had once hung in Charles's Clarence House office during the boy's childhood. "She would have done this sooner," Charles reportedly said, touching the frame with his fingers. "She would have demanded peace." The inclusion wasn't symbolic. It was intentional. Insiders say Charles spent over 2 hours that day rereading Diana's handwritten letters, which he kept in a small leather pouch marked "For the Boys." Aides reported the king was uncharacteristically emotional, even referencing her final note before their 1996 divorce. "She warned me, if I let the crown divide them, it would haunt all of us." For the first time in public memory, Charles openly admitted that Diana's absence had left a wound no one in the family had been able to heal, not even him. Charles believed invoking Diana's memory would be the only way to reach both sons. William, forever the steady heir, had kept her grace. Harry, the more fiery spirit, carried her emotional truth. Charles saw the divisions not just as royal or political, but maternal. "She's the one thread they both still love," he told a senior aide on October 16th, "so let her tie them back together." That day, he sealed the photograph between the letters and gave final clearance for delivery. The next morning, at 6:30 a.m., the letter, now triple-sealed and accompanied by Diana's photo, was entrusted to Lord Ainsley Haversham, a man who had served the crown since 1984. As the convoy rolled out from Windsor toward Heathrow, the king watched from his window in silence. The image of Diana's smile, now enclosed in the hope of reconciliation, symbolized more than nostalgia. It was the Queen of Hearts making one final journey, this time not to be mourned, but to be remembered as the bridge between two sons long torn apart. As Lord Haversham's plane crossed the Atlantic, it carried more than parchment and wax. It carried the weight of history, the hope of a father, the memory of a mother, the fate of a family. And waiting at the end of that journey was a man the crown had once let go. Prince Harry, tucked in the quiet corners of Montecito, had no idea what was about to arrive at his doorstep. A message not just from his father, but from the legacy he never truly left behind. A royal messenger sent to Montecito. On the morning of October 18, 2025, Lord Ainsley Haversham stepped off a private jet at Santa Barbara Airport, carrying a sealed leather folio marked with the royal crest and a single handwritten label, to Prince Henry, Duke of Sussex. The journey had taken 11 hours from Heathrow, with security briefings at each stage. But what he carried wasn't just a letter. It was the emotional weight of a dying monarch's last request. He was under strict instructions: deliver it to Harry's hand, and say nothing else. By 2:20 p.m., the black SUV provided by local embassy staff arrived at the gated entrance of Harry and Meghan's Montecito estate. Meghan reportedly greeted Haversham, offering tea, but the envoy declined. "This is for the Duke alone," he said, and was led to Harry's study. There, in silence, Lord Haversham handed over the sealed envelope. Harry recognized his father's handwriting instantly. He read the letter once, then again. The third time, he read aloud the words, "You are both my sons. The world needs you together." His hands trembled. Meghan remained outside the room. According to insiders, she respected the moment entirely. The letter's emotional weight was evident from the moment Harry walked out. His eyes red, his voice low. He reportedly whispered to her, "He really wrote this himself." Later that evening, Harry took a walk alone on the property's northern path. He was seen carrying the letter folded in his jacket. At 8:17 p.m., he called an unlisted Windsor number, one that rang directly in the king's private chamber. Charles answered. Few words were exchanged, but the final sentence from Harry was recorded. "I'll come, but only if William does too." That same night, Lord Haversham returned to London. The mission was complete. Charles had reached the son who once declared freedom from the firm. And despite years of public wounds, lawsuits, and interviews, Harry had responded, not with defiance, but with openness. For the first time since March 2021, he agreed to set foot on royal ground, not as an outsider, but as a son answering a father's final plea. The letter had landed. The response had come. But the path to reunion was not yet paved. Across the ocean, in a palace full of protocol and pain, the second half of the king's plea awaited its test. If Harry had been the lost son, William was the loyal one, the anchor of the crown. And to bring him to the table would require not just emotion, but persuasion. The next chapter of this royal reconciliation would rest in the hands of the future king. William's reluctance and reflection. Prince William, the heir to the British throne, received his father's letter on the morning of October 19, 2025. It was handed to him by Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, during breakfast at Adelaide Cottage, where William and Catherine had been staying. At first, William refused to read it. He placed it in his jacket pocket and proceeded with his day. School drop-off, a charity call, and an afternoon security briefing. He carried it for 3 days before opening it, one aide later revealed. The emotions were complicated. William felt anger, grief, and betrayal, all tangled together. Harry's explosive interviews, especially the one aired in January 2023, had left wounds that hadn't healed. And while William had never publicly retaliated, he bore the full weight of royal responsibility in Harry's absence. According to a close friend, William said quietly to Catherine that night, "If he wants reconciliation, why now? Why when father's fading?" Yet, something about the sealed letter gnawed at him. By October 22nd, William finally opened the letter in his private study. It was short, just 2 pages, but deeply personal. Charles wrote not as a monarch, but as a father. "William, you are the future, but Harry is part of it too. My greatest sorrow would be to leave knowing my sons never found their way back to each other." That sentence, sources say, broke him. Catherine found him silent, seated for hours, the letter still in his lap. "He's asking me to forgive what I haven't even processed," William confessed. Catherine urged him to see the bigger picture, not just as a brother, but as a future king. She reminded him that legacy isn't built on pride, but on peace. That evening, William contacted Sir Clive with his decision. He would attend the summit. But he made one condition clear: no press, no photographers, and no leaks. This had to be a private act, not a performance. For William, this wasn't about headlines. It was about honoring his father's final request, and perhaps confronting the brother he once called his best friend. With both sons agreeing, the royal house held its breath. The meeting would happen, not in front of crowds, not under the shadow of Westminster, but behind the old oak doors of Windsor. The world wouldn't know the moment it happened, but those within the palace understood. This wasn't just about Charles's health, it was about legacy. The king had opened the door. His sons had stepped through. Now history would quietly unfold in the one place it all began. The Windsor Summit begins in silence. On the foggy morning of October 26, 2025, Prince Harry arrived at Windsor Castle in an unmarked vehicle, escorted by a discreet security detail. The arrival, recorded only by internal palace logs at 6:52 a.m., was kept entirely off the books. No press, no photographers, not even a confirmed flight manifest. Inside the castle, Prince William had already arrived at 5:30 a.m., preparing for what would be the most private and emotionally loaded conversation of his adult life. The brothers would meet face-to-face for the first time in over 3 years. The location was deliberately chosen. The king's private library, lined with portraits of monarchs and family members, including Princess Diana. The door was locked from the inside. No aides were permitted. Charles had requested only one thing: a single audio recorder placed on the mantel to document the meeting for the family archives. The conversation lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. No interruptions, no notes passed under the door. Only the ticking of the clock and the voices of 2 brothers long divided. When the doors opened at 9:21 a.m., both William and Harry emerged quietly. No eye contact with waiting staff. No statements. But eyewitnesses noted their eyes were red, their shoulders slouched, not in defeat, but in emotional exhaustion. A palace staff member later said, "They didn't look angry. They looked like men who had just been through something they didn't know how to begin to explain." Neither returned to their regular residences immediately. Both stayed within Windsor's royal apartments for the rest of the day. Charles was informed of the meeting's conclusion just after 10 a.m. When told it had lasted over 2 hours, he reportedly closed his eyes and whispered, "They stayed." That single sentence carried the weight of everything he'd hoped for. The summit had not solved every issue, But it had broken the silence. The king, who once feared he would die without seeing his sons reunite, now knew the first bridge had been built. Quietly, carefully, but undeniably real. Windsor Castle had witnessed centuries of conflict and reconciliation, but none as intimate as this. What began as a father's tearful request had sparked a royal reckoning. Years in the making. The reunion was not for cameras, nor for history books. It was for them, for family. And as Charles prepared for one final appearance, he would no longer stand between his sons. He would stand beside them, if only for a moment. A monarch's last image. A father's final piece. The king's final appearance. On the afternoon of October 28, 2025, Windsor's St. George's Chapel prepared for what had been described as a private Thanksgiving service. Officially, it was meant to honor the 20th anniversary of the King's investiture as Prince of Wales. But inside the palace, staff whispered a different title, the King's Last Appearance. By 3 p.m., a small group of royal guests arrived. No press were invited. The mood was solemn, not celebratory. The king had not been seen in public for over 17 days. At 3:23 p.m., King Charles III entered through the chapel's west arch, leaning heavily on a carved cane. His steps were slow, his frame thinner than before, but his face, despite the toll of illness, wore a look of peace. Behind him walked Prince William and Prince Harry, side by side, their expressions unreadable. For the first time since Queen Elizabeth II's funeral in 2022, the two princes stood in unison behind their father. There were no speeches, no gestures, just presence. Royal photographer Simon Mackenzie, the only one allowed inside, captured a moment just before the first hymn began. Charles, seated between his sons, looked up at the stained glass window of King George VI and smiled faintly. Later, aides would say that Charles turned to both sons and whispered, "If this is the last image the people see of me, let it be us." Together, the image, released to the public 36 hours later, would become known globally as the last portrait. The service lasted only 44 minutes. Afterward, Charles retired to the private quarters behind the chapel, helped by his valet. William and Harry reportedly remained in the nave for several minutes. No words were exchanged in front of staff, but body language told the story. Neither moved to leave first. When they did finally exit, they did so together. The image of the two princes, walking shoulder to shoulder behind their father's fragile figure, became a turning point not just for the public, but for the monarchy itself. The king had made his statement, not with words but with presence. His sons had walked with him, stood with him, and, perhaps for the first time in years, understood the weight of the legacy they shared. But Charles knew he couldn't leave the world with just a portrait. He needed one final message, not just to his family, but to the nation. So with pen in hand and his heart heavy, the monarch wrote the letter that would become his final conversation with the people he served. A letter to the people. At 6:12 a.m. on November 1st, 2025, Buckingham Palace released a letter titled "To the Nation and My Sons." It had been written by King Charles over several sleepless nights at Balmoral, finalized just 48 hours before his chapel appearance. The letter, only 842 words long, was a mix of fatherhood, reflection, and royal legacy. Printed on Windsor embossed stationery, it opened with a simple salutation: "To my country and to the hearts that hold it." The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. In the letter, Charles acknowledged his mortality directly. "My health now fades, but my love for this nation never will." He reflected on the lessons learned from his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and his gratitude to Princess Diana for giving me the two greatest gifts of my life. He spoke of pain, forgiveness, and the silence that had plagued the royal family. "There is no crown strong enough to survive division," he wrote. "It must be worn together or not at all." But the most powerful passage came halfway through, directed explicitly to William and Harry. "You were raised by different forces, but shaped by the same love. If I have one request left to make, let it be this: lead together. Heal what I could not." The letter did not demand obedience. It offered grace. And in that grace, Charles gave the nation a final image, not of power, but of peace. The letter was read aloud on BBC Radio 4 at 9 a.m., sending shockwaves across the country. Within 6 hours, the letter had been translated into 19 languages, circulated through embassies, and projected onto the walls of Parliament Square. The people didn't just hear the king's voice. They felt it. Commentators called it the final wisdom of a modern monarch. Newspapers across the world printed the text in full. And inside the palace, William and Harry reportedly read it again together that evening. Alone in the drawing room where they once played as boys. It was the message they both needed. It was the message only a father could write. The king's voice now echoed across a grieving nation, but it was his sons who would carry the next verse. For the first time in years, they were united by something larger than themselves. Their father's wish. The people had heard it. The world had embraced it. And now, it was their turn to speak. In an unprecedented move, the brothers prepared to face the cameras, not as fractured heirs, but as a united front, ready to honor the man who brought them back together. The brothers speak. At 12 p.m. on November 4th, 2025, a joint video statement from Prince William and Prince Harry was broadcast live from Windsor Castle's East Drawing Room. No royal press officer introduced them. No pre-recorded footage played. It was simply the two brothers, seated side by side, both wearing dark suits and solemn expressions. The world watched in silence. For the first time since September 2022, William and Harry spoke publicly, not about royal duties or scandals, but about each other and about the king. William began, "We have not always agreed. We have not always understood, but we have always been brothers. And today, we choose that bond above all else." His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "Our father's final hope was not for crowns or headlines. It was for us, and we will not let him down." Then came Harry. "Forgiveness doesn't erase truth," he said, "but it does make a future possible." His words were brief, but sincere. The video lasted 7 minutes and 26 seconds, yet it rewrote years of royal narrative. The brothers promised to co-lead upcoming charity events in 2026, with a focus on veterans, mental health, and climate resilience. They also confirmed their attendance at the planned Unity Jubilee scheduled for June 2026. In closing, William placed a hand on his brother's shoulder and said, "We're not going back. We're going forward." Together, the video ended with both men standing in silence. No anthem, no applause, just unity. Social media erupted within minutes. "This is the monarchy we need," one user wrote. Global headlines called it a historic turning point. In California, Meghan issued a statement of support, while Catherine shared a photo of the brothers in their childhood, captioned, "He'd be proud." It was no longer about the fallout. It was about the path forward. The feud was not erased. But for the first time, it didn't define them. The message had been sent. The people had responded, and the future was in motion. As King Charles quietly retreated from public life, the stage no longer belonged to one monarch. It belonged to two brothers walking a new path. But their journey wasn't just about family. It was about rebuilding trust, restoring hope, and honoring a legacy forged in both pain and grace. And now all eyes turned to the year ahead, where a new royal chapter was already being written. A new royal chapter begins. As 2026 approached, plans were finalized for a new era within the monarchy. One shaped not by tradition alone, but by transformation. Charles, now residing full-time at Balmoral Castle, officially transferred most ceremonial duties to Prince William on December 15, 2025. But in a surprise announcement, the palace confirmed that Prince Harry would share leadership roles in a joint charitable coalition under the newly revived Royal Foundation. It was a quiet revolution, and it had started with a father's final request. The crown itself would not be co-worn, but the platform would be. William retained official succession and constitutional powers, but Harry's influence returned in spirit and action. The upcoming Unity Jubilee, scheduled for June 14, 2026, would be co-hosted by both brothers. It would mark not only Charles's 75th birthday, but also the rebirth of a united royal family, according to the event press kit. Meghan Markle would attend in a limited capacity. Catherine, as future queen consort, would lead the public engagements. More than a dozen initiatives were launched under the Jubilee banner, ranging from climate relief in the Commonwealth nations to new support networks for military veterans. The message was clear: the monarchy was becoming relevant again, not just regal. Internally, palace staff reported a shift in morale. "It's like someone turned the lights back on," one aide said, and Charles, though rarely seen, reportedly receives weekly video updates from both sons. "He doesn't say much," one insider revealed, but he always ends with one word: good. On January 1, 2026, Charles issued one last statement to the Privy Council. "My sons have chosen unity. My work is done. It was not abdication. It was peace." And as the bells rang in the new year, the monarchy stood not on a single man's shoulders, but on a shared vision of future, family, and forgiveness. Diana's sons, once divided, now walked together into the light of a new era. A kingdom watched in silence as a father's final plea echoed through Windsor. The feud was long, the wounds deep. But through the heartbreak, a new path emerged, one led by unity, not division. Charles's last will wasn't about gold or thrones, it was about forgiveness. And now, with William and Harry walking forward together, the monarchy faces its most human moment yet. What would Diana think? What do you think? Comment below. The legacy lives on.